The Only Warrior Cats podcast strives to be family-friendly, but we may cover themes not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
I feel like we need some theme to talk about death. Like we're pulling up to the pet cemetery.
Oh no.
We're here to place flowers on the graves of our fallen cat friends.
Hello, and welcome to the Only Warrior Cats podcast. We are the only Warrior Cats podcast, and this is the show where two Warrior Cats veterans read through each of the books with their new-to-the-series friend and help initiate him into the world of the Warrior Cats. I'm Zoe B, and I am joined by my two lovely co-hosts, José and Lola Sebastian. Say hello.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
Today we are going to be discussing the first book in this Warrior Cat series, Into the Wild.
So, Zoe, how did you get into the Warrior series?
So I first got into the Warrior series when I was a young child in elementary school because I, believe it or not, did not have very many friends. And so the way that I spent most of my time was with books. I had an older sister and I got a lot of hand-me-down books from her, but I also was trying to sort of forge my own identity. And these books were my way of doing that. They were something that nobody else in my family had ever read before. It was still pretty early on, so there were still new books coming out all the time. It just scratched all of those weird little child Zoe brain itches that I had. How did you get into the books, Lola, since you are my fellow Warrior Cats veteran?
Well, first of all, if I say your childhood sounds like Helga Pataki,
That's fine. I was also a huge in school, so totally fits.
Yeah, I don't know why that's not a surprise to me, because I guess it's not like your brand, but knowing you as a friend.
Listen, there's been a lot of growth that has turned me into the person I am now. I had to go through the mean phase to get to who I am.
A lot of very sensitive people start out as the kind of kids who, like, kick other children.
Yeah.
And I think Warriors is marketed to those kinds of kids.
Kids who kick other kids.
Do you just want to fight someone? I was actually like a small gay child, like peering into like a wishing well. So I was always like the token medicine cat of my friend group. So crazy enough, this was not the first Warriors book I read. And I don't know if that's the case for you, Zoe.
No, yeah, I started at the beginning. How do you even jump in later?
My dad picked me up the first book of The Power of Three.
Mm.
And I loved it, but I was also confused. So then I was like,
Understandable.
Dad, you have to go back to the beginning. So then I went back to the first series. Yeah, I very quickly became like a Warriors super fan. I was featured on Erin Hunter's blog a couple times.
Oh my gosh. We are in the presence of a celebrity.
Oh god, no. I ran the most popular Shadow Clan Facebook page at the time for a time period. It's a period piece, you know, where we would all like role play as cat characters.
Were these original cats or like based on characters in the books?
Yeah, they were all OCs. We weren't allowed to call each other by like name. I think my name was Model Heart, which I hate now.
Model like MOTTLE? Like
Yes.
for something to be mottled?
My co-runner, one of my close friends, and we're still friends to this day, was Tiger Star, but no relation.
That's so funny.
I met some of the Erin Hunters when they came to town. I have a signed copy of Warriors Series 1, Book 6, The Darkest
Wow.
Hour, and Series 3, Book 6, which I think is called Sunset.
That's very cool.
And they were super nice. Me and my friends all wore matching like Shadow Clan bracelets that we had hand beaded. And all of the Erin Hunters, they're very good with kids, and they took time to talk to us about like, why Shadow Clan? I mean, I think partially it's like when you're in the 5th grade, you're drawn to edgy things. I definitely would have been in the Scourge fandom if I was like a fandom kid at the time, because I was very like, I'm very dark.
I have a question though about Warrior Cats in general. Since you both grew up with them, was this like a popular thing amongst the kids?
It wasn't as big as like Harry Potter by any means. I mean, that was something that like everybody had read or had watched the movies, at least for me. And I know I'm a couple years older than Lola, but I think that there were a couple kids in my grade who had read some of them, but they weren't super fans in the same sort of way that I was, because I would play with my toys and separate some of my stuffed animals, and I was really into marbles. I collected marbles as a child, and I would separate them by color and type, like some that were, you know, like matte colored, and some that had the like cat's eyes things in them and stuff like that, and I would separate them into clans. So that was how I was a fan. I had my own sort of version of the warrior cats, but none of the other kids that I knew who read them were into them like that. It was just like, oh yeah, these are books that I've read and I liked them. What about you, Lola? I know you said that you had at least one or two friends who were super
I
fans.
think I converted them. Like, maybe not intentionally, but like I loved cats. So ended up getting like really into it, and I think like indoctrinating all my friends who I wanted to talk about it with. I don't think Warriors was intended initially for elementary schoolers. It's
Really?
like the vibe that I get is that it was for like middle grade readers. It is listed as a young adult novel, Into the Wild, everywhere that I've looked.
I would have guessed middle school reading it myself for the first time. It was like, it's just on the side of edgy where I wouldn't want it in the hands of like someone in grade 4.
Which is so funny because grade 4 was like peak Warriors time. Age 8, the high point of my Warriors obsession.
Yeah, I think for me it was between like 7 and 10.
Which is funny because if you read the parental guides, it's like age 10 is a good place to start with Warriors. And I'm like, oh man, age 11 is like when I phased out of Warriors.
So the copyright for the first book, this Into the Wild book, came out in 2003, and that was the year that I turned 7. So I may have actually been on the very cusp of it. Like I may have found the books when they were first coming out. I am only just now realizing that. So they felt like it was this already established series, but I guess not. So before we get into the plot summary, I want to ask you, when we were first talking about starting this podcast and we floated this idea of talking about this kids book series that Lola and I had both read, what were your thoughts?
To be honest, it was a lot of confusion. I had never in my life heard of these books, not once. I'm a bit older than both of you, so that's, I guess, why. I was just a bit too old for these things. Similarly, when I like checked around with my friends asking them, have you heard of these books? Do you have like a little brother or sister who maybe read them? And almost all of them were just like, no, I don't know what this is. I don't know what Warrior Cats
Whoa.
is. Just blank stares.
That
I
is
think I had one friend who
surprising.
was like, my little sister, I think, read one of them. And that's the closest I got to any sort of like affirmation that these existed more than 3 months ago.
Wow, that's really
That is so
surprising.
funny.
I think we forget that kids' books sometimes live in their own little world. And then unless they break through with like a movie or some other major
Yeah.
media property.
Like, because I have a younger brother, and he's 7 years younger than me, so there's a pretty, you know, significant gap. And so the stuff that he was into as a kid was just, I don't know, like so alien to me. Like, what are these? There's like this whole series of like spy books for children. What is this? And it just absurd stuff. So yeah, I think that that's valid if surprising.
What are like popular book series with kids today?
Well, I definitely can't answer that one.
I have to look it up. I mean, the problem is, I think all of these articles are old because they're like Warriors, Hunger Games, a series of unfortunate events, Captain Underpants. And I'm like, no, that's my generation.
Yeah, that was what I read.
That's what's popular with the Zoomers, but what are the alphas into?
Maybe they're just watching TikToks or something. No more books.
Let's see. The Inheritance Games. Let the games begin.
Are they still like ripping off the Hunger Games every few years now still?
A Stone of Throne and Bone. Yeah, honestly, a lot of this looks very, very similar to when we were kids, so...
Maybe it's just how conservative that a lot of publishers are getting. They only want to bet on the true tried hits.
Yes.
And they're probably more inclined to bring back some classics than something completely new or different.
That's so frustrating. I feel pretty bad for kids today, actually. Makes me feel compelled to become a children's book author.
Do it.
No, because I only write things for adults.
You can do both.
If we've learned
That's
anything,
it.
we find that kids love reading above their intended age level. So
They do.
If Warriors is for middle schoolers and Stephen King is for adults, I definitely did not know that as a kid because I was reading Warriors in elementary school and Stephen King
Yeah.
in middle school.
Yeah, I read The Stand as a 13-year-old. So yeah, I don't know how to segue into this.
Magical sound effect, maybe? Meows with chimes.
That's better than just meows, but that's not bad. That was good. I like that.
the meow mix.
All right, so
Meow mix.
Jose, as the newcomer, would you like to give us a quick overview of what even happens in this book?
I'm going to give it my best shot. This was a big one. A lot of stuff happened in this book. We start off with a prophecy from a cat named Spotted Leaf, a member of the Thunder Clan, and their trusted, valued medicine cat. The clan's fallen on hard times and is in desperate need of warriors to fill its ranks, and in Spotted Leaf's visions, she sees that fire is the only thing that will save the clan. We move forward and we meet this other cat, living a blessed domesticated life. His name is Rusty. He's a small orange cat, which, is a little fire-like, so we're getting our hints right off the bat.
Ooh.
That's the sound the woods makes that calls Rusty forward to explore them on his own, ignoring the calls of his friends to stay a pet, But he decides he wants to live in the wilderness. There he stumbles upon members of Thunder Clan. They didn't like him so much at first because he's a domesticated cat and they kind of look down on those. But one of them actually takes a shine to him, sees some potential in Rusty, and they decide to bring him into their clan, and he becomes christened Firepaw. So as a young cat in training, a warrior in training, he is taken under the tutelage of, oh God, who was it? Lionheart?
Lionheart?
He was mentored by Lionheart and Tiger Claw before being assigned to Blue Star. He works as a young cat in training to become a warrior, makes a few new friends, and he's starting to prove himself. People are beginning to believe in them. But there's crisis brewing as one of the rival clans, Shadow Clan, seems to be making moves against some of the other cat clans in the area. Oh, I should probably mention there are 4 cat clans in this wilderness. There's Thunder Clan, which is Firepaw's home clan, Shadow Clan, who seem to be the bad guys in this book at least, River Clan, who are a bunch of like water cats. They like hanging up by the water, I guess. We don't really know much about them. And then there's Wind Clan, who we don't see any members of. They got chased out by Shadow Clan at some point. We don't really find out in the book. Eventually, there's like this big meeting called, and all the clans are supposed to get together and talk things out peacefully. We find out there that Wind Clan has been chased out of the woods, so there are only 3 left. And Shadow Clan, since they're running out of food, is demanding that the other 2 clans, River Clan and Thunder Clan, start giving them tribute in the shape of like kills, and they're also like stealing kittens from other clans. I forget if this is the word we learned it there or not, but they are doing that. They're shady guys. So for some reason, River Clan kind of backs down, and it's very strange that they just enter this agreement with the other clans, or they bend to Shadow Clan, which I thought was kind of lame. And then Thunder Clan decides they're going to stand and fight, but they're kind of weak and depleted. Firepaw's out and about for some reason, and he comes across another cat named Yellowfang. Yellowfang has deserted from Shadow Clan, their former medicine cat. Instead, even though she's weak and injured, she still puts up a fight, but Firepaw seems to have the better of her and then gives her a bit of mercy. She ends up being a guest of Thunder Clan and eventually wants to hang out with them because she doesn't trust where Shadow Clan is going. Their leadership is not to be trusted. They're up to shady stuff. With some information from Yellowfang, Thunder Clan tries to get together and they're going to strike back against Shadow Clan. First, they consult this weird stone thing. I didn't really know what was going on there, but their leader, Blue Star, has a vision, and apparently things are going to go down, things that are very important. Still not entirely sure what's going on there. But they lead this fight against Shadow Clan, and they do pretty well. They catch them off guard and take them down a bit, shatter their leadership, and it looks like even though there are some losses, Thunder Clan at one point gets attacked as well, and sadly Spotted Leaf gets taken out. And it's very sad. Spotted Leaf was one of the good ones. Well, when it wraps up, thankfully, it looks like Shadow Clan is getting its act together. They've gotten rid of the bad cats, and hopefully they'll get in the good cats and right their ship. Thunder Clan is looking okay now, and I don't know, River Clan, I guess, they're the real winners because they didn't have to do anything. The other 2 clans fought and figured it out for them. So, end of summary.
Marvelous. Absolutely fantastic.
That's an excellent summary.
It was. So yeah, I mean, there is a lot of stuff that happens in this book. It is quite the dense beginning to a series, very full of world building and lore. So where would you guys like to begin in our discussion?
Well, I'll say if this had been the first Warrior Cats book that I'd read, I don't know if I would have read any more. As a kid, you're so open to new ideas and stuff, but like world building info dump is like an immediate turn off for me for every kind of story. It's like I love fantasy, but it has to have the most like seamless exposition in the world, and unfortunately fantasy novels tend not to. And this book, who's that? That's Tiger Claw. He's like this. And who's that? That's Ravenpaw. He's like this. Where are we going? To the Moonstone.
I just want to share the very first note I wrote down when I started this book, and it just reads 7 pages of lore right off the bat. what have I just walked into? Because that's what you see. You just see like lists of characters and clans and maps. And I'm like, this is a lot.
But
Yeah.
in that way, it's also kind of exciting, especially for children, because you have so much to explore.
Yeah, it definitely feels like a very full world. I think that that's why so many kids love it, because there's this, you know, entire fleshed out universe that you can play in and pretend that you're within, and because they have so many details, you know, you really feel like you can get immersed in it. So in that respect, I mean, I think it's great. While I was reading it, I was so worried that it wasn't going to be good because I haven't read it in over a decade. Fortunately, one of my first notes here is not as bad as I was worried it would be.
Yeah, the writing was pretty good, actually. I was pleasantly surprised.
I was so impressed. Like the whole time I was reading it, I was trying to figure out whether or not Warriors is high fantasy or low fantasy, because it's kind of both.
Where would you classify? I know, Lola, I know you have read Redwall.
Yes.
Jose, are you familiar with the Redwall
I have
series?
no idea what that
Okay,
is.
it was, let's see, when did Redwall come out? I want to say it was like the 80s, right? Yeah, 1986 is when the first Redwall book came out. And it's similar, except instead of cats, it's forest creatures, and instead of clans, they live in an abbey in the, I assume, British countryside. There's a lot of like odd religious undertones. There's a lot of food and cooking, and it's all very cozy, and it is marvelous.
Lots of feasts.
So many feasts. But I think that Warriors, like, I think that it very clearly is inspired from, or at least comes from that tradition that Redwall started. I would say that Redwall is high fantasy. I think that Warriors is high fantasy, but that might be a hot take.
Well, Rusty, Firepaw, Fireheart comes from like the Muggle world, but I actually think the more of a closer comparison, I actually started to see kitty pets as like hobbits. They serve the
Ooh.
same function, and Rusty is totally like a Frodo figure.
That's an interesting, oh my goodness. I have never even thought of it like that.
Because it's not exactly like the kitty pets are in the world of humans just because they live with the humans. They're in the world of cats.
Yeah.
A kitty pet is a close proximity to an everyman because humans are domestic and the cats we know in our lives, like us, the reader, are domesticated. Do we know the origin of where warrior cats came from?
Not yet. I mean, they do. So later, near the middle or second third of the book, they have a clan gathering at Four Trees, which is this like it's four big trees that they meet in the clearing.
It's
that
the
is in the
United
middle of
Nations
this.
for
Yeah,
cats.
it's the UN of cats. And at this meeting, the apprentices that are there, including Firepaw and his friend Greypaw, they have a discussion about the history of the clans. So they discuss how there are these ancient clans that were the, you know, ancestors of the current clans, and there's Tiger Clan, who are the cats of the night, Lion Clan, that are big, strong, golden cats, and Leopard Clan, who are the swiftest. They have these myths that these clans have passed on or given the currently existing cats skills and traits and talents. And for instance, Leopard Clan, the swift warriors, they are the source of the hunting skills that cats currently have.
It's not true. You know what I mean? Like, yes, all cats are descended from big cats, etc., etc., but like the warriors as a society, as a function in like England, question mark, they began as domestic cats, most likely, who then like became feral. So all kitty pets are then potentially warriors. So it gives the reader this opportunity to be like, you know, like when I was a kid, my cat Sparky, I was like, Sparky is a warrior cat because he was so tough. He was so cool. It's so sad because like he lived to be like 20.
Oh, wow.
He lived a long time. He actually only died 2 years ago or so. So he's been with me like my entire life. Sorry, I know I'm getting emotional about my little guy.
It's okay.
But my special little guy, he was an incredibly good hunter. When we got him, he was an indoor-outdoor cat, which like I would never do now, but I was like 2 or 4 when we got him, so you can't really judge me, can you? You can judge my parents, I guess, but we've never had any problems with like infestations or anything, which is kind of significant. Like living in the Pacific Northwest, everyone I ever knew has talked about like, you know, in the springtime we get mice or whatever, and we've never had those problems until Sparky died, and we realized he was hunting all the time around the perimeter of her house, like keeping rats out of the garage. So for the very first time, the spring when he passed away, you know, and it, like that's the function of cats when you think about it, is to like keep pests at bay. But like as soon as he died, we got spiders, we got beetles, we got rats. We live in a very naturey part of the world, and he had been keeping them out the whole time. Warriors likely became, it's like how the pigeons that you see in cities, and I will go on about this forever and ever because it's like, it makes me extremely emotional. But pigeons began as domesticated birds. Like they're the only like truly domesticated birds to this day. I mean, you could say that parrots are like semi-domesticated, but they're really not like fully domesticated. But pigeons are. They have been our pets forever. And then people, you know, wealthy Edwardians started dumping them when they just got bored of them. And now we have all of these feral pigeons in every city because they're just so adaptable. And that's basically what warrior cats are, isn't it?
I wonder if this is where the elements of the fantasy come in, because, yeah, obviously, you know, realistically, all of these cats were probably, did probably come from domesticated cats, at least originally. You know, it depends on how many generations back you go.
We are descended from lions and leopards and all that. To me, that actually spoke up to the realism of how these clans are formed. Not because they're literally descended from those animals, because of course they weren't, but that's like a common tactic that was used by any sort of ruling structure or power structure where they wanted to claim legitimacy or authority. They would say, oh, by the way, I'm descended from Alexander the Great, or I'm descended from Julius Caesar. It wasn't true,
Oh no.
or there was no like way they could prove it. But by tying to those like strong bloodlines, it would reinforce their authority, and it was a way of, you know, like proclaiming their divine right of kingship, basically. So when I saw that in the story, I was like, oh, that's kind of historically interesting.
Warriors kind of leans into the whole idea of genetic memory, because even if Rusty begins as a house cat, he's dreaming of like hunting in the wild because he has it like somewhere in his ancient subconscious. It's almost psychoanalytic.
See, I was gonna ask if it was maybe a little fascist, maybe?
I mean, kind
Yeah.
of.
Because
I've definitely.
that honestly was the vibe that I got, and I think that definitely fits with what you were saying, Jose, with the, you know, this idea of like this great past and these, you know, very powerful like uber cats of the ancient clans. And there's just like weird politics where one of the biggest points of conflict is this idea of not like inherently not trusting anybody outside of your group. That's why a lot of the ThunderClan cats were so upset that, you know, they brought in this kitty pet, and it's why the ThunderClan cats were so upset when they brought Yellowfang in, because, oh my gosh, she's from another clan. You know, she's inherently evil. Firepaw asks some questions about the clans to try and understand what he's getting into, and he asks why the clans don't just work together if there's a limited amount of territory and food. The quote is, "Alliances bring more trouble than they're worth."
The authors, plural, are literally bringing up the idea that they might all be better off if they just work together. So clearly, we're not supposed to glorify the constant, like, war, and yet it's also kind of the appeal of the series.
Yeah.
The cats are kind of fashy. They have these arbitrary borders. You know what I mean? Like, they are wild animals that are creating, like, humanistic borders, and they're all cats. They're all just cats, but they're always trying to kill each other over, like, you can't be on the Sunning Rocks. Those are our Sunning Rocks.
And they're like out there telling them like, oh, we're descended from lions who like took down antelopes, and they're like in the woods chasing down like a mouse or something. Like they're not exactly living these glory days that they think they are.
Blue Star is very traumatized. And I feel like she kind of coerces little Rusty into joining the clans. He thinks that he's doing it independently because he's like, I've been having these dreams about being an ancient warrior. But it really is an appeal to that kind of rhetoric. And she literally tells him, like, if you don't come to join us in the woods, they're going to take you to the cutter. Can we talk about the cutter?
I kind of winced when I read those bits. I didn't expect castration come up in a book about cats, but I guess it makes sense.
No? So this, just a PSA before we begin this discussion, you should spay and neuter your pets. I know that I sound like, what's his name, Bob Barker or whatever, but genuinely, animals, especially cats, you really should keep them inside. You should get them spayed and neutered. That is the position of this podcast. It is not up for
Yes.
discussion. All right, let's go ahead.
That said, they literally, in like the second chapter, hang the threat of castration over the main character's
Yes, and it
head.
is so threatening because it turns you into a lazy, irritable, you stop dreaming about the outside, you stop wanting to play, you stop having any amount of energy, you lose your vitality, essentially, and it's very, I mean, literally emasculating.
There was that one pet cat that was described, and he like sounded so sad. Just sits around and is kind of miserable all day. And Rusty saw that and was like, "I don't want that to be me."
But do we have any evidence that this is even true, other than like anecdotal?
Well, definitely not. Like what? He just heard it from the neighbor cat. Like that's basically it. And then of course all the cats in the wild say that, but what would they know? They live in the wilderness. The wilderness cats seem incredibly prejudiced towards like the domesticated ones. I felt like the term kitty pet was like a slur at some point. Like anytime someone uses it's like, whoa, you just called him that. That's right. That's how little I think of him.
Yeah, I feel like Kitty Pet to the Warrior Cat series is what Mudblood is to Harry Potter.
And maybe this is why, as a kid, I was so drawn to Shadow Clan. I'm not gonna say I hate ThunderClan, but I find it very difficult to root for all of these bigots.
They're very xenophobic.
They are. Versus Shadow Clan is like damaged, but often they bring in outsiders. They directly challenge a lot of ThunderClan's morals.
The characterization of Shadow Clan I think is problematic, but I think that Shadow Clan makes it clear that this book is very much a product of its time. This was written in the early 2000s. It was published in 2003. I think that Shadow Clan really represents a lot of the like political boogeymen of the time.
Yes.
Where at least the two notes that I have are that Shadow Clan has like welfare queen vibes.
Yes.
Where, they essentially their argument for why they deserve the prey and the territory from the other clans is because they have so many more babies. And, the other clans have had issues with not being able to find enough food, and they had some harsh winters, and that's why their populations are kind of struggling a little bit. But Shadow Clan didn't have those issues. And so they, have all of these kits. Now it is revealed that some of these kits, at least some of them, were kidnapped, if you will. So there is, some of that extra nuance to that. But their argument is that they deserve things because they have more babies. And during the mid and early 2000s, and even today in some places, that is a very common myth about people who are on public assistance is like, oh, they're just popping out babies so that they can get more welfare. But also, this one is maybe a stretch. But in this essay, I will argue that Shadow Clan is characterized as similar to the Taliban.
Absolutely, yes.
They are kidnapping and indoctrinating your children, and they are using child soldiers, and they are abusing children to try and take over the world for their nefarious purposes. And that was, in the early 2000s, even in the UK, where Erin Hunter is from, like, Islamophobia was not just a US thing.
Shadow Clan reminded me of like the moral panic around African warlords.
Yeah.
The idea that like they're going into the woods and they're stealing your children to become soldiers and sex slaves, and we have to intervene. We have to do something. And there's a lot of commentary in Warriors about like the necessity of political intervention.
Mm-hmm.
But it's especially interesting because then when kitty pets venture where they shouldn't and say, but we're all cats, why are we fighting? The Warriors are like, you don't understand.
There's a lot of just weird political undertones in this. Not even undertones, overtones.
Yeah, and ThunderClan, I don't know, they just seem like huge hypocrites a lot of the time because they can talk about their honor and their morals and their superiority. But I mean, look at what's his face, Tiger Claw. Him's like scheming, and he like literally killed the former deputy leader. Tiger Claw kills Red Tail, and once that almost comes out, he nearly kills his own apprentice. And this is a guy who's got pretty high standing within the clan, and when he says something, people listen. So how much can we really say that ThunderClan has any sort of moral superiority in any of this?
Well, and something else that I think is interesting is that when they're first recruiting Rusty, one of the main talking points that they have is that they're offering him community. They are offering him this support network and this, people who will look out for him and fight for him, and they can work together to become part of something greater. At first, it almost feels like that's maybe a good message. All of us are fans of community here. We are fans of people working together to do good things for each other. And it almost feels like it's a statement that goes against the idea of rugged individualism and, like, Rusty, you don't have to be this strong guy on your own. You can work with other people and lean on them when you need to. But then, like, later it becomes so, like, insular. I don't know how to say that word. There's very distinct boundaries on who is and is not part of the community, and I think that's where it starts to fall apart and it becomes not a good thing anymore.
So you can map the 4 clans onto the political compass.
Oh no.
And the weird thing is, ThunderClan, our quote-unquote heroes, are the authoritarian right. And ShadowClan is the libertarian right.
Wait, how would you even place WindClan? They're barely in the book.
I mean, from what I remember, later on I would probably place them as, like, the libertarian left because they're all, like, hippies. And I would place RiverClan as, like, the authoritarian left because, like, they have a strict respect of rules and honor in a very similar way to ThunderClan, but they're also, like, we love to collect seashells. You know what I mean? There's kind of this, like, boomery, like, hippie coding.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, like, although the ThunderClan warriors might be, like, those dumb RiverClan warriors, they love to collect feathers and seashells and make their caves pretty. As a kid, you're reading that and you're like, I like pretty things. I have seashells on my bookshelf right now. I keep wondering if we're really supposed to root for ThunderClan.
I don't know. I mean, that sort of gets into a bigger question of how much do we value authorial intent, and should we discount the depth and nuance of a book just because it's for children? Obviously not, since we are doing an entire podcast just on these children's books. But I don't think that was the intent. Like, I think that the authors, though I have never met them, so, you may know better than I, Lola, but I don't think that the authors thought about it like that, or at least didn't intend to have that level of nuance to it. I think that ThunderClan, I think that it is similar to Gryffindor. I mean, this book, I think it does have a lot of parallels to Harry Potter.
Yes.
I think that the clans really do map onto the houses exactly perfectly. Like RiverClan is Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff is WindClan, ShadowClan is Slytherin.
I would have reversed RiverClan and WindClan. But yeah, whatever. They're not even important because it's just Slytherin versus Gryffindor all the time.
Yeah, but, like, I mean, you can say the same things about Gryffindor that you can about ThunderClan, where they're, like, that's the house of cops. And they are the cops of the woods.
But you know what? It's not just spiritual, right? Like, fascists are often very occult. Which it's a frustration of mine because then, like, people get into, like, occult stuff and everyone's like, oh, that's very fascist. And it's, like, not inherently. I would actually consider the warrior cats more of, like, a theocratic monarchy because they're given divine right via StarClan.
Yeah.
Their power is absolute.
Well, so this is a question that I have that might seem a little bit silly. What's up with the Moonstone?
It's magical.
Is it just straight up magic?
I've only read this book, so I can only base it on what I saw. But it seems like it carries the potential for magic in the future, but there was nothing in this book that made me think, oh, wow, yes, this is a world of magic. It still exists in this, like, in-between space where you could just say, like, Blue Star was starving and pushed to a limit, and then she hallucinated something because she was inspired by this rock that happened to be illuminated by the moon in just the right way.
But why is it so sparkly? Why does it glow like that?
It's probably like a quartz or something. A slab of a gemstone.
I was thinking, this is my clickbait video essay thumbnail concept. I think that the Moonstone is actually radioactive. So where the Moonstone is located was an abandoned coal mine, some kind of dig site, like human dig site.
Is it like radio?
I don't know. I think it's some kind of radioactive thing that the humans uncovered and were like, oh shit, we can't deal with this. We're gonna, this is an abandoned mine. Nobody should go near it. But the cats found it. It glows it has these properties where if you get too close, it kind of makes your brain break a little bit. I'm just saying, I feel like either it's radioactive or it's just straight up magic.
That's fascinating because as a kid, I always pictured it as like an opal, and I chalked everything
Yeah.
else up to like spirituality. But that's I don't think that the warrior cats are inherently magical, but they are definitely very spiritual.
Yeah, I think that they are very much tied into this mythology they've built for themselves, and it's shaped how they see the world. So when they come across something that could just be a radioactive rock that's going to kill them, they see something of profound divine importance.
All right, so I guess I am going to be the hot take. I will be the token the warrior cats books are full of magic.
Wait,
Like
if
that.
you're both on opposite sides, maybe like I'll be the swing vote here then
I'm
as we
not
go
on an
along.
opposite side. I actually think that there's a bit of magic and a bit of spirituality both.
Okay.
If it is not straight up magic, how do you explain the 9 lives stuff that the clan leaders possess?
Yeah, I mean that's the main thing for me, right? Is it's like the further we get into the books, with the more we learn about StarClan and like interacting with StarClan, which in which cats just like speak to the dead. They have visions of like their friends who were alive. These are the questions that we have to ask about real life as well, right? Because we've all, I don't know if we've all, but I have had supernatural occurrences where it's like, yeah, now I believe, in something. How they're not really so different from us in that regard, are
I
they?
think they're just trying to explain the world the way they can as cats, just trying to get through it. Like the 9 lives for Blue Star, she got messed up by those rats, right? It's not. I feel like the 9 lives thing would make more sense if she like died and then just like popped right back up. It's like, okay, one more life down, let's get back to it. But it just seems like shorthand for really getting messed up in a fight.
If any of you are familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, it's like how when you go down in a fight, when you're brought back to life, you're only brought back to 1 hit point. Like you're not brought immediately back up to full health, and that again is very similar to this. So it could be, not necessarily the super powerful magic that we sometimes think of when we think of regeneration or resurrection magic.
I mean, for all I know, the Star Clan is just like a thing they imagine.
Yeah.
Like, presumably we'll meet them because
Yeah.
there are books that have Star Clan in the title, but like, we don't see any Star Clan cats in this book.
In life, the cats are so xenophobic and they're constantly like fighting amongst themselves. But in StarClan, they're all together. They're all just a clan.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Is that not the implication? Because the implication that I get
Oh
is
no,
that
it
it's like
definitely is. Yeah.
after death, you stop caring about petty things like borders and you all imagine there's no heaven. Like
Yes.
that was me doing like a Gal Gadot singing Imagine impression for the record. It's also especially weird because it presents the idea that if someone treats you in a xenophobic manner, what you should do is impress them and then they'll respect you.
Yeah.
Which, as a child who was an immigrant, I don't know if that was like the best message for me to be reading.
Yeah, there's a lot of like culty behavior and a lot of like bad advice for how to treat other people in these books. Outside of even just the violence. At one point in the book, Firepaw is punished for some misdeed, and the way that they punish him is by not letting him eat. Like they withhold food from him to teach him a lesson.
Oh, it's because he ate that kill, right? He ate the kill before instead of sharing it with the clan.
Oh, right, that's what it was, because Yellowfang told him that he could, and he was like, okay.
Yeah.
And they found him and were like, no, sorry, you don't get to eat. And they like didn't let him eat for like a whole day. It just, I don't know, like it feels very toxic.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of withholding of food and sleep that as an adult made me go, uh-oh.
It makes me think that the only way Firepaw slash Fireheart can really turn things around is by changing this clan. Like, it's not going to be enough to just get rid of Tiger Claw and fight him at some point. Like, this clan needs an overhaul in how it's structured, how it treats like the new recruits, and how they punish and learn and live with other clans. It really seems like a poorly organized community, is what I'm saying.
I guess my confusion is it's like if the leaders are the closest to Star Clan, thus the star suffix, and like they're being imbued with lives, like all of the great wise warriors are maybe not peaceful, but they are like the most mystical.
And now, do you think that that's a failure of the world building? Like, do you think that that's a, mistake or oversight on the part of the authors? Or do you think that there is some reason for that? Like, even though the most powerful cats are the ones who should be more peaceful or more wise and, shouldn't be interested in fighting as much, even though they're the ones in charge, the whole system is still incredibly violent. Like, do you think that that's on purpose, or do you think that that's just...
I don't see how it could possibly be a failure of the world building, because the world building is meticulous.
Yeah.
It feels like this is the start of an arc. Eventually, the Warrior series was supposed to become about how all the cats should live in peace and harmony. The problem is books need conflict.
Yeah.
So we start out with this very xenophobic, borderline fascist system that it feels like we're supposed to outgrow, and I don't know if we ever outgrow it.
I guess we'll find out, but I completely agree with you. This feels like a world that's in crisis.
It's not sustainable.
No, I mean, they're tearing each other apart in this first book.
It's very interesting that a main character would see this world where everyone's suffering and tearing each other apart and be like, I want to be a part of that. That seems cool. But then again, I also relate to the fact that he's like, but my intuition is telling me that this is the right path. I'm like, yeah, me too, buddy. Me as well, friend.
These books are so violent.
Yes.
Like, that was something that did surprise me, was how much violence was in these books. There's so much death. There's so much blood. Like, even literally the end of this first or second chapter ends with a child, like an apprentice, running into the camp and saying, hey, my mentor was literally just murdered in front of me. What do I do? And so that's terrifying. As an adult reading it, I do kind of like it, or at least respect it. As a writer, there are definitely stakes in these books. And I think that's part of why I liked it so much as a kid, is because I felt really invested, and it wasn't like, I don't know, wishy-washy, like, oh, you know that the good guys are always going to live because they're good guys. Like, that's Spotted Leaf is killed off page. Firepaw just comes back and it's like, oh yeah, Spotted Leaf is dead.
That genuinely surprised me. I was like, how could they do Spotted Leaf like that?
It's such a power play, I guess, on the part of the writers, that they're showing, yeah, anybody can die at any point. Game of Thrones could never.
They were teasing a romance between her and Firepaw, even. Like, he was looking at her kind of side-eyeing, like, oh, she's kind of cute. And I was like, oh, interesting.
Don't get me started.
He's a child.
Isn't he like 1 or 2?
No.
He's
like
paw.
He's like 6 months old, I think, yeah. Because moons are months, right? It's like a full cycle of the moon. He's like a teenager, right? He's like, let's just say he's like 17.
Yeah. Like, she's a young adult.
That's creepy.
And he's a kid. It is creepy. I mean,
it's weird.
And she's a good medicine cat, but the way that he's so into her is...
I think it's just more a dive into the psychology of a teenage boy, which is not entirely foreign to me. So I was like, yeah, I could see that. I know what it's like to be in high school and, you have a crush on the cute teacher in class. And it's like, yep, it happens.
So the main question, the question that I have been teasing in my discussions with all of you, is Blue Star a MILF? Because I think the way that Blue Star is described by Firepaw, or from Firepaw's perspective, it's very much like she's powerful and intimidating and beautiful and strong and had mysterious, and it's very she's the housewife down the street and he's the pool boy.
I think that Blue Star and Spotted Leaf are both very, very feminine, but in completely different ways.
Spotted Leaf is like a manic pixie dream girl.
I don't know how I feel about her, because on the one hand, relatable, but on the other hand, I'm like, I feel like she's a little too encouraging of this 17-year-old boy being attracted to her. And it's also hard, now as an adult, I've not really been in that situation, but imagining being in that situation where a kid is attracted to you. And I've been the kid in that situation, and now as an adult it's extremely uncomfortable to think about, because on the one hand, maybe you do really care about that kid and you want to mentor them or you want to help them, but the responsibility of an adult is to set up those boundaries, and I don't necessarily see her setting up those boundaries, which makes me think what the hell is your issue?
Yeah.
But cats also live very different life cycles. Which makes me think, well, if he's almost an adult and she's an adult cat, and like all adult cats are kind of the same thing, it's not exactly like, you know what I
I think
mean?
it's
He
also
didn't go to the
important that we're
cutter.
getting this from his perspective, so we don't really know what's going on in her head.
Yes.
So whenever she's doing anything that seems like
Ooh.
vaguely suggestive, to me, I always read that as like Fire Paw being like, "Oh yeah, she's kind of into me, isn't she?" And it's like, no, she's not, dude. I mean,
Oh,
it's
I
again,
never even
it's
thought of it that way. I
that's
like
just
that.
I don't know.
That's a
Maybe
great
my own
idea.
experience is showing here, but when I was a teen boy, that's the sort of thing you always play it in your head. You're like, oh, maybe this woman who has clearly not expressed any overt interest, but she did look at me that one time. That could mean something. Yeah, to me, it just read as like
She's in
Firepaw
love
being
with
kind of
me.
desperate, and it's like, okay, dude, you're gonna get through this puberty thing. Just try not to don't do any harm, please, please.
And, I think you're right that that third person omniscient perspective adds this kind of ambiguity because you
Mhm.
never exactly know if it's like, this is the author telling you how it is. We see into his head, we know what he's thinking, and we
Mhm.
see the world. I would not call him a self insert character personally. But I
No.
can understand what's a good term for him, like a conduit character. Like how you watch Avatar: The Last Airbender and you learn about the world alongside all of the kids.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, we're all walking into this world for the first time as well, so we're right there with him, and I think we're meant to empathize with him in throughout his journey.
Maybe this is a good time to bring up some of the issues I had with the writing as an adult.
Go ahead. You know I am always here for your writing hot takes, Lola.
Listen, I was pleasantly surprised, and I will clarify that. So I want to do the negatives and the positives as I'm shuffling through my sticky notes. So it is really fun. It's
Mhm.
really fun to read. I totally get why people became obsessed with this, my fourth grade self included. But the functional writing is a bit underwhelming. The prose is just stuffed with adverbs and adjectives.
Yeah.
Which, my MFA creative writing brain is like, no, no, stop. Even though I don't really care, I'm not even one of those people who's like, you should aspire to one adverb per chapter. No, just, oh my God, does everything need to happen like slowly, suddenly, quickly? There are some in there that are a little egregious. I don't know if we had a flirtily in there, but you know what I mean, cunningly, where it's like, okay.
Yeah.
And then you've got your typical like children's and fantasy cliches, like the fact that chapter 1 begins with "It was very dark," which is just basically like it was a dark and stormy night.
Yes.
And yes, I know these books are for children, but they do read as over explained sometimes. Like, I wrote down his stomach growled, reminding him of his hunger, which made me laugh so hard because it's like you didn't have to explain that your stomach growling means that you're hungry. Also, how about the fact that the cats physically meow at each other?
What's wrong with that?
But I mean, when they're talking, it's a little weird to me that the way that they talk is to
And
be
we're
like
just
meow
reading the
meow meow
translations
meow
in the
meow
book.
meow. Yeah, which also makes it a little bit weird when you consider that they have like certain names for things. They know what all the animals are called, or at least,
Yeah, like there's squirrels and mice and voles.
yes, there's an owl, or a dove or a pigeon. And then the cats are named like Dovewing and Pigeon Heart or whatever. But then they'll be like, that's the
Mhm.
silver pelt. It's a bunch of stars. And I'm like, so do you know what it is or don't
Yeah.
you?
And they call humans two
In
legs.
Thunderpath.
Right. Yes. And they describe cars as monsters. And I'm like, so is it that they are so like divinely aligned with nature that they understand everything natural but not everything artificial, which is kind of
Yeah, but
cool.
then why don't they know what humans are? Why do they call them two legs and not humans?
It's this very, my ecofeminist brain coming out here, but it's this distinction that positions humans outside of nature,
Mhm.
which I'm never a fan
Yeah.
of, because humans are a part of nature. They are not like the masters over nature, but I mean, a group of British ladies wrote this. So then there's this part of me that's like, okay, that's very nice of you, Val Plumwood, but you can't expect just a group of average people to have that perspective when it's not the automatic world perspective, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? And it suits the world building to say that the humans and the cats are inherently separate.
One
Mhm.
thing I noticed when I started the book too is like, well, I didn't notice it at first. But when I was reading the book, I flipped back and I'm like, oh, because they have those two separate maps. And then I realized, like, oh, these are maps of the exact same location. Just one is through the human's eyes and the other's through cat eyes. And just like
Mhm.
the way they're drawn differently, even like the cat version was so much like softer and friendlier, whereas the human one
Mhm.
was very harsh, I guess, very strict, look like something a machine put out.
It looks like a map that you would use to do a word problem in a math textbook.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, what is the circumference of Druid's Hollow if you're traveling on Windover Road at 35 miles an hour?
As a kid, this added so much magic to it. But they appear to be in like a rural to suburban area. RiverClan Camp is located on a campsite. ThunderClan Camp is located in a woods that has a name. So it's basically just like, here we have a moor next to a campsite, next to a sparse field with, you know, some garbage next to ThunderClan. But that's the other thing too, is they're aligning ShadowClan with the garbage. Which I'm like, they're cats, dude.
Yeah.
Why do they care if it's human garbage, if it's useful?
So I don't know if we ever really get a good answer to this, but what is the distance? Like, if we had to guess, how many like acres or miles is this map? Cat walking
We're gonna
speed.
map this out.
Well, normally cats walk an average speed of 2 miles an hour. So it's like 20 miles, like max.
I'm looking this up on the Warrior Cats Reddit.
Feline locomotive behavior. What a awesome couple of words.
Apparently, Vicky Holmes, one of the Erin Hunters, stated that the lake they live around in the arcs after the first one is about 1/4 of a mile in diameter.
Okay.
So we can assume it's probably like a couple miles each way.
Why would it take them the whole day to get there then? This is my CinemaSins moment. This is my
Ding.
I need a bell to ding.
Don't ding.
This is actually unrealistic.
This is the height of criticism now.
This book about magic cats doesn't follow laws of physics.
Also, spider webs do not stop bleeding. Ding.
They could if they were thick enough, if you had like a
Sorry,
whole
no,
bunch on top of
ding.
each other.
Ding.
When you start to look at it from a human's perspective, it seems convoluted. But I wonder if that just means that we're not getting in. We need to get in the mind of a cat, and we need to look at it from a cat's eye view.
Maybe that's the moral all along. We'll never truly understand the world of cats.
Which also makes the question, like, how many cars are on this rural road?
I mean, it only takes one, so.
True.
Oof.
But also, where are you going? Yeah, hang on, just let me hop on into my car and go to the old mine. The old abandoned mine called Devil's Fingers.
I actually had a driving instructor one time try to explain to me why deers get hit by cars. And that's because cars, when they're coming at you, they don't change shape. They're just one fixed shape. And other animals are used to seeing creatures moving, like legs moving and stuff like that. So they can kind of tell when something's moving towards them. But when they see a box that's just moving and not just getting bigger somehow, it confuses them. They end up getting hit because they don't understand what it is.
So what you're saying is someone needs to tweet at Elon Musk.
At Elon Musk, deer-legged Tesla when.
Perfect tweet.
The fact that the only Twitter I now have is for this podcast.
Lola, I'm trying to get away. Every time I think I'm out, you pull me back in.
We need our cat-like reflexes on point here.
All right. These books are very violent, and there are lots and lots of cats who die. So we have decided to keep a tally of at least all of the named cats who die in each book. And this book had 4 deaths. 4 deaths in the first book in the series. That's pretty impressive if you ask me. So we had Redtail. Pour one out for Redtail, the original ThunderClan deputy. He was fine. He died off page. Then we had Oakheart.
The OG warrior's death. Pour one out. Pour water out.
And then we have Lionheart, who was the final death in this book. Lionheart was my favorite. Even reading it originally as a kid, he was just so kind and funny, and I was like, he's the best. I hope that he and Firepaw are best friends forever, and then he dies at the end. And as an adult reading it, I was like, wow, Lionheart is so kind and funny and gentle, and he's like the best mentor that Firepaw could have. And I still loved him, even though I knew he was going to die. And then, last but not least, I almost said last but not leaves. Last but not least, we have Spotted Leaf, the medicine cat for ThunderClan. And Lola, I think you have a an obituary for her.
From Warriors the Ultimate Guide, and I think this is going to reignite our conversation about Spotted Leaf, and I'm
Oh
sorry for
no.
that. And it has some spoilers, so Jose, I apologize, because it does have some
Oh no, what are
spoilers.
is there a way to like
Spotted Leaf was the medicine cat in ThunderClan when Rusty the kitty pet, who would one day become Bleep, first arrived. She saw in him the same qualities that Blue Star did: courage, spirit, unwavering loyalty to doing the right thing. But Spotted Leaf also saw Rusty as a warm, sensitive cat who was not limited by his expectations of her role as a medicine cat and viewed her more than anything else as a friend. If things had been different, if Spotted Leaf had been a few moons younger, an apprentice warrior rather than a medicine
Ooh.
cat, their relationship would have become even closer. Instead, Spotted Leaf died before she and Fireheart could find a way to express how they felt about each other, which left her frustrated and lonely in StarClan, missing the friend she had left behind. She refused to let go of the connection she had shared with him and walked in his dreams, guiding and supporting him in his early days of Bleep. When Bleep, when okay, how do I say this without when something happened, Spotted Leaf knew that she had lost him to insert cat that he inevitably ends up with here. In her heart, she understood that the young she cat was a far better choice, able to walk side by side with him, bear his kits,
Aw.
and share responsibility for the clan over the coming seasons. Spotted Leaf grieved for missed chances, for a life that never could have been, but she still watched over him and her former clanmates as they moved to the new place that they would go. And I'm so sorry. In the final confrontation with such and such, Spotted Leaf did one last grand thing as her one final gift to her beloved Fire Heart.
Okay, I have a very important question about this is the Warrior's Ultimate Guide, right? Was this written by Fireheart?
It's weird, right? It's deeply weird.
It this sounds like he's writing about an ex-girlfriend who, if only she could have dated me, right? That's what she really wanted. She was so lonely because she just couldn't be around someone as amazing as me. And, she died, but her memory and, she always knew that she needed to help me, the very important Fireheart, do some great things.
And it's so weird because in the book there is the ambiguity. And then in this ultimate guide, they're like, no, she was in love with him. And then she grieved him
Was
forever.
there never any other like cute guy her own age that she like was she waiting for him her whole life?
Well, she's a medicine cat.
Yeah, medicine cats, I don't know if they say this explicitly in this book, but it's not like a spoiler, but medicine cats are not supposed to have mates or have kits. They're sort of forbidden from relationships
Yeah.
because they have to be, objective and be in tune with StarClan. And I don't know what justification they have for it. But
So really what she sees in him is that he's an outsider because he doesn't perceive her as like this sexless medicine cat. Like they become close and she's like, oh, I'm gonna have an affair.
she's gonna cheat on StarClan with this child.
I feel it's so weird because she's this very idealized figure within the series of this tragic heroine who died too soon, but I think she's kind of messed up and I feel bad for her. She's
Yeah.
kind of like a Blanche Dubois.
She was like sucked into the role of being a medicine cat, and she had to leave the certain cat parts of her behind. And it's sad. It's tragic what ThunderClan has done to her.
Yeah.
She's the other woman because she's like, but I know that I could never bear his children. And I'm like, yeah, but listen, why do you care? Because clearly
Yeah.
that's not what's important to you about this. You feel like he's the only person that could have understood you, and that maybe if things had been different, you could have been understood.
Yeah. Not to get into the age gap discourse, but if we're assuming that this is a child or teen and an adult, if their ages are analogous to that, then it's on the older person to not engage with that. Like it doesn't matter if the younger person is like super into you or if they're the ones trying to like start a relationship or whatever. Like it's on you, the adult, to say, no, sorry, this is unacceptable. You are making me uncomfortable. Please stop.
Well, the fact that she looks at this like essentially a teenager and is like, someday we will have an affair. And this is portrayed kind of romantically by the Erin Hunters.
They're old British ladies.
It's giving like Cardcaptor Sakura.
Or like, how old is a cat when they become a medicine cat, or like start on the journey to be a medicine cat? I'm just thinking, like, is she still like trapped in that mindset where she was like, okay, I'm gonna close off this part of my life. I am now medicine cat, and she started a new chapter. And when she looks back, it's like feelings she didn't consider, or they weren't part of her life except for when she was much younger.
Oh, like when people get married like right after high school, and then later when they become like middle-aged, they're like, I was never able to like explore or do my own thing. And so then they like that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
and they want to sort of go back to their youth. I mean, it doesn't make it right.
Uh-huh.
I'm just trying to understand her psychology here.
It's frustrating for so many reasons. I'm kind of over here like a little irritated by the whole thing. But it's fine. It's genuinely fine. And I actually think it's kind of powerful if you had a child character who had a crush on this, older, unavailable, unattainable woman, and then she dies. That's, I mean, not to get too personal, but it's unimaginably difficult when the person who shapes like who you are passes away. And that's something that a lot of kids can relate to because death is a very common, painful thing. Like, we lose people who are integral to us. Grief is a perfectly excellent universal theme for a children's book. The problem is that then Erin Hunter's confirmed, like, oh, yeah, totally. She totally would have been with him. It's not just like Rusty is grieving. It's like, yeah, but Spotted Leaf was so into him the whole time, and she's giving him like special guided wounded advice from StarClan. That's so messed up.
I mean, I guess we'll see as the books go on, though I'm generally inclined to kind of say, like, I don't really care what the Erin Hunters have to say. I'll keep my own interpretation of the book.
Yes, death of the author.
Yeah, well, I don't wish them specific harm, but, in a figurative sense. I'm just thinking at some point we need to get one of the Erin Hunters on here, and we'll, like, make one of them answer for their crimes.
Yeah, to clarify, it's not an issue with the Erin Hunters necessarily. That's the other thing, right? Is famously, they disagree with each other. So maybe when the first book was written, the intention was what we read. And then later, as the fandom developed and another Erin Hunter wrote this book, their personal vision of Spotted Leaf is that she's like this wounded, fragile, otherworldly thing who developed this fixation on this apprentice, which may not have been the original intention.
But like, I wonder if that's what it came down to, is that she, had this vision. Not that that makes it okay, but she had this idea of him in her head that was, the hero rather than the child that will later become the hero.
Well, she saw this like precognitive version of him. Like, she perceived him before he was, which, again, not to get personal, but also like very relatable. Like, when you meet someone and you're automatically like, oh, I feel mysteriously connected to this person, like they're someone I've known for a long time. But for her, it's not just that she felt that, it's that she had visions of him, potentially plural visions of him, which, again, I also think that it's kind of problematic that she should be expected to give up so much for Fireheart and the person he inevitably ends up with in StarClan. That she's like expected to be like his mother virgin horror figure all at once.
Poor Spotted Leaf.
But also, ew.
Yeah.
Poor Spotted Leaf, but also ew.
That's the moral of the story.
Because you mentioned there might be some disagreement, or there was some disagreement amongst the Erin Hunters. And I just remembered, there was a line that Zoe noted that was in the book. Alliances bring more trouble than they're worth.
Ooh.
Maybe there's some spicy stuff behind that line.
Ooh,
something to keep an eye on,
you
maybe.
think that was... Oh, we're getting into the drama now. That is juicy.
If it's here in the first book, maybe there's trouble in the Erin Hunter verse. Or what do we call the collection of the beings that make up Erin Hunter?
The Erin Hunters. Hunter Clan.
Hunter Clan, yes.
Yeah.
Maybe the ideological differences in warriors are the battling ideologies of the authors, which then also makes it such a rich text. Because if in one book it's like unanimity and pacifism is the only way, be an environmentalist, and then in the next book it's like, actually, fascism is cool.
So is it like all a microcosm of the dangers of maybe not dangers, the possible pitfalls of democracy and living in a globalized world that, like, there are so many of us, like, there's no way that we can all agree.
I actually started to think that while I was nearing the end of reading this book, where I was like, is this actually like a criticism of democracy as like a farce? Is this like the Four Trees? Is this like actually a United Nations satire? Because it is.
Yeah, because they don't even try and investigate ShadowClan for war crimes, even though they should, but they just don't.
I want to know more about these women.
They definitely seem like, we were talking about the overlaps between the Warriors books and the Harry Potter books. They definitely seem like S tier over J.K. Rowling.
Well, there was the fact that one of the minor Erin Hunters started being transphobic and they kicked her out of the group.
Hell yeah.
This happened just a couple years ago. This was pretty recent, so she wasn't one of the OGs. She wasn't one of the Kate Carey or anything. But she started posting some questionable stuff, and the Warriors fandom is actually very, very queer. And it's something that the Erin Hunters have always been accepting of, or so I've heard. That they've always been really like enthusiastic about the Warrior space being a safe place for queer kids to express themselves.
Maybe that's the strength of working as a group. There's no one person who is ever like indispensable. Like, I don't know,
Yeah.
like who is going to kick J.K. Rowling out of what? Her being the creator of Harry Potter? There's like no one to do it. It's nice that they can hold each other accountable. I don't know, I've always been interested in like something that's created by a group of people instead of like a singular authorial voice. And maybe that's why it's so good at expressing different perspectives and ideas. And that makes me more interested in reading more books in the future if we're going to get like different visions of this cat society or societies.
Speaking of future stories, what are your sort of expectations, or what is your list of things that you want to see explored in future books?
There's stuff I know we're going to see, obviously, Fireheart and his ascent. He's going to become more a big deal in these books, and he'll save them all somehow.
What?
Wait, whoa. Are you trying to say that fire alone will save the clan?
I think that Spot the Leaf was onto something.
I don't know.
Not literally, thankfully, but you know what I mean. So what I would like to see, though, is I kind of want to see what the other clans are all about. I feel like I got a real good look at Thunder Clan. Shadow Clan, I want to look at it from the inside. And like River Clan and Wind Clan, I don't know what's going on with them. River Clan in particular, like their decision at the Four Trees, still like, I'm looking at it like, how could they just do that? They just rolled over. Like, what is the strategy? What are they doing? What are their plans for the future? I'm hoping Wind Clan, when they eventually do show up, I hope they will at some point. We can learn more about what they're all about and how they just like fled. Like, why did they do that?
Before we go, we should reveal what we decided our warrior cat's name should be.
Would you like to take the helm on that? Because I don't know how the
Well, now we just got
do
rated
that.
explicit. Thanks a lot, Zoe.
You just cut all of the words that I say.
I chose the name Moss Feather because it evokes the forest and the air. And it also reminds me of like an old bird that is like wise and ethereal and otherworldly.
The warrior cats in the books are often named based on their like fur pattern, etc. And so I decided to go with something that relates to where I live. And I recently moved to North Carolina, which is the home of pine trees. We're just full of pine trees all over the place. And so that is why my name is Pinetail. The tail
Aww.
because it sounds nice.
And it keeps you balanced.
Oh, it does keep. Oh, that's good. I like that.
I struggled to come up with one of these names because I'm not familiar with the Warrior Cats world, so I kind of had to just wing it, I guess. And I went with Blue Paw. Paw because I am still young, learning, new into this world. And blue, I always like blue. I sort of wanted a water vibe, but also an air vibe. Also, my favorite bird is the blue jay, which may not surprise some people, I guess. And so I kind of wanted to tie all of that in together. And I know this puts me on a collision course with Blue Star.
Bold of you to assume you're going to become a leader.
That's the thing. I don't know if I want to be a leader. Maybe I'll just be something else.
Maybe we'll both be medicine cats.
Yeah. I don't know. I liked Blue Star though in this book. She was cool. We were talking about her energy earlier on. She seemed so confident and so like she was holding the whole clan together. And it sort of made me wonder like, why is your clan filled with such horrible cats and bad values and so weird and kind of ashy? But she herself doesn't get any of that on her somehow, which I just was very impressed by her in general. So maybe I want to be her apprentice too. Me and Fireheart.
Could it be the corrupting influence of Tiger Claw, or have I said too much?
I definitely have suspicions about that one.
Dun dun dun.
I'm pretty sure he's gonna get up to some shenanigans in future books.
Shenanigans is
A
such
delicate way of putting that.
So yeah, this is the jumping off point of our adventure that we are all going to be going on together, Pinetail, Mossfeather, and Bluepaw, as we explore these Warrior Cats books together over the next many, many months and probably years, because there's a lot of books, folks. There are, 80 something, I think we discovered?
I'm sure everyone's going to be reading along with us every week. They'll be reading them as well.
Yes.
It's the only way that this podcast can work. So I hope you all go to your local libraries.
You know what, though? That would be so cool if we could hear from listeners.
Yeah, and if you want to reach out to us or share some of your thoughts, that's okay. Future Lola can splice something in. Do we want to do like individual plugs as well?
Yeah, we can record those
Okay.
in the future.
And we'll just like slap a mom in at the end.
Yep. Thank you all so much for listening to this podcast and diving into this Warrior Cats universe with us. But please help control the pet population and have your pets spayed and neutered. It really is important. And until next time, we have been the Only Warrior Cats podcast. And say it with me, folks, fire alone can save our clan. The Only Warrior Cats podcast is hosted by Zoe B., Lola Sebastian, and José, and is edited by Lola Sebastian. Our intro music was written and performed by Neil Farrell of The Leftist Cooks, and our podcast art was drawn by Aud McName. The Only Warrior Cats podcast is produced by Nebula. If you'd like to support the show, you can come join the clan over at patreon.com/theonlywarriorcatspodcast, where memberships start at just $1 a month. You can get lots of cool perks like end-of-episode shoutouts, having your cat's meows be forever enshrined as a podcast sound effect, and getting access to our exclusive bonus episodes where we cover all the Warriors content outside the main series. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon.